Hi, this is Dan the Scholar, your host for today. Back in April this year, there was an uproar from the Africans within the continent and in the diaspora following comments by two French doctors, researchers, seen here in the picture on French TV, about proposals by a French institute to test a modified version of the tuberculosis BCG vaccine. The vaccine was believed to be effective against the COVID-19 illness. Celebrities such as current Senegalese international football player Demba Ba and other retired players such as Samuel Eto'o and Didier Drogba did respond on Twitter, expressing their horrors, concerns, or fury at this proposal. Several other Africans in the continent or in the diaspora also did express on social media their disgust with the idea. For the record, let's look briefly at this interview. I may not have the rights to replay this video, but let's look at their discussion. The first doctor there on the right said, "This may be controversial, but shouldn't we do a study in Africa where they do not have masks, treatments or resuscitation? A little as it is done in AIDS studies where they use prostitutes to test some things because they know that they are highly exposed and do not protect themselves. What do you think?" That was Dr. Jean-Paul Mira. The other speaker, bespectacled, on the left, Dr. Kamil Locht, responded, "You are right. We are thinking of a parallel study in Africa to use the same kind of approach with BCG placebos. I think there's a request for a proposal. I don't know if it's out yet or not, and we will in fact think seriously about that too." French Health Institute INSERM came with a statement in the media repudiating the experts' comments as erroneous. Dr. Mira also did apologize for his clumsy expression, but all that did not stop Africans worldwide, most of them furious, from expressing their opinion on social media. The following are two images, banners that did appear on social media rejecting the idea of vaccination in Africa. False stories also became widespread about European companies or philanthropists like Bill Gates trying to kill all Africans or introduce impotency in the continent. You can read for yourselves some of the comments that did appear on social media. Other rumors were alleging that clinical trials had already started in Senegal or the Democratic Republic of the Congo. That's all far from the truth. On screen is a page from the Spanish website AS. It's some kind of advertisement or guidance for those thinking of enrolling or getting involved in clinical trials. With this, what I would like to say is that the only clinical trials that were being talked about were those that had started in the US or the UK. For example, here's a headline from the BBC website about clinical trials that had started in the country, especially at Oxford University. The origins of mistrust in Africa of vaccines and pharmaceutical companies perhaps goes back to Nigeria in 1996. That year, the pharmaceutical multinational Pfizer did a trial of a meningitis vaccine on children, 11 of whom died in that country. The company was sued as a result. Although consent was given prior to the vaccination, the lawyers representing the families of the deceased claimed it was not properly given simply because the legal representatives of the children did not speak English, or they had limited understanding of the language. So folks, all those stories about trials in Africa back then were fake. Perhaps in recent months there have been trials going on, but back then there wasn't any. In reality, clinical trials are best done in a diverse group of healthy individuals or patients. For a company to do a trial in any country, the subjects have to grant it what is called informed consent. after everything has been clarified. Further, a drug company is not an oil, gas, or mineral extraction and drilling company that normally pays the government a hefty amount of money and then it goes on to do what it likes. No, the industry is governed by rules, regulations, and ethics. The beginnings of strict regulations in the pharmaceutical industry worldwide, especially with regards to the granting of consent by a test subject, was at the end of the Second World War, when members of the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany, better known as the Nazi, were put on trial. The Nazis were not only accused of war crimes, but also crimes against humanity, and that includes using humans as test subjects in their experiments. After the trials, anyone, including companies, couldn't have things their way. They had to abide by the rules. Nuremberg City in Germany was where the members of the Nazi Party were tried from December 1946 to July 1947. As far as using humans in scientific research is concerned, there were 23 defendants. 20 of these were doctors, all members of the party, and their crime was murder, torture, and so forth, all in the name of science. The judgment that was delivered found 15 of the accused guilty. 7 of them were sentenced to death. And after the trials, the 4 American judges presiding over it came up with a 10-point system that describes the ethics and the ethical approach to working with humans in scientific research. And this draft document that they finally issued became known as the Nuremberg Code. This image shows the 10 points of the Nuremberg Code, which in German is known as the Nuremberger Codex. Today, of course, the laws are hundreds of pages long, but right after the war, Second World War, any pharmaceutical company wishing to test drugs or any medical research institute wishing to understand the mechanism of disease had to abide by the laws in this code. Let me read it out for you. Point number 1. Voluntary human consent is essential. 2. Experimental results should result in good for the society. 3. Anticipated results should justify the experiment. 4. Avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering. 5. No experiment if there is a chance of death or disability. 6. Minimize risk to subjects. 7. Proper preparation and facilities to protect subjects. Number 8. Experiments conducted only by a qualified person. Number 9. Subjects can withdraw at any time. Number 10. Terminate experiments if results are known or with best judgment. Now let's turn our attention to the thalidomide tragedy. Thalidomide is a drug which in history caused serious life-changing incidences which led to new laws in the pharmaceutical industry. On screen you see a 2D and 3D structures of this drug. In a solution of this drug, 2 molecules are present. It's the same drug, but they have different configurations. You get this from the chemical synthesis of the drug. These are shown in the 3D images with black backgrounds. The one on the left is the R configuration, while the one on the right is the S configuration of this drug. In organic chemistry, these are called stereoisomers. They are mirror images of each other, but when you try to superimpose them, meaning placing one on top of the other, they do not match. The molecule on the left is sleep-inducing, while the one on the right causes bodily deformation. Thalidomide originated in Germany from the company known as Chemie Grunenthal in 1957. The indication provided was that it was to be used as a mild sleeping pill and against morning sickness, especially in pregnant women. It was available as an over-the-counter drug in 61 countries where it was mostly produced under license. In 1961, There were reported cases of deformities in children who were born with shortened limbs, hearing and urinary tract defects. The number of victims was in the 10,000s, and that was in the 61 countries. Only one country didn't have that problem, and that was the US. Why? Because they had rejected the approval of this drug in the US. At the FDA, there was a lady by the name of Frances. She wanted to see data relating to pregnancy. There was none, so she rejected it. By then, such studies were not required in clinical trials, and so the drug was given the authorization to be marketed in all 61 countries. In 1962, two US Senators, Kefauver and Harris, took it upon themselves to bring changes to laws in the pharmaceutical industry. From then on, a drug company has to show that its drug has efficacy, meaning it does what it's supposed to do, and that it is safe before any marketing authorization is granted. Also, adverse events relating to a particular drug have to be reported regularly, and the risks of that drug should be made known. Further, the drug should not be made available at the pharmacy without a prescription. President Kennedy signed those bills into law that year. Thalidomide is still in use. In fact, in the 1960s, it was used against leprosy. Current indications include its use in easing the pain in suffering AIDS patients, alleviating the suffering in blood cancer patients, and as a remedy against an autoimmune condition. With this slide, we move on to the Declaration of Helsinki of 1964. This is another landmark event in the history of laws in the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, companies or organizations that were formed later on would refer to their foundation being in the Declaration of Helsinki. That also applies to laws that were formulated later on over the years. They would refer to their basis being in the Declaration of Helsinki. The organization that was responsible for this document was the World Medical Association. This organization was founded in 1947 in Paris. It is closely associated with the WHO. It's non-governmental, and it deals primarily with ethics. When it was established, it had members from only 27 nations. Today, it has members from 113 countries. This organization spent 10 years working on this document, and on their 18th General Assembly meeting in Helsinki, that was in June 1964, they discussed and formalized it. As we know from the Nuremberg Code, Nazi doctors committed atrocities against civilians or people living in Germany, but it also came to light that Japanese soldiers committed horrific acts against the citizens of China. What you see here is an emblem of the WMA, or World Medical Association. And this map shows the different nations from which members of this organization originate. The Declaration of Helsinki is mainly about the ethics and moral code of conduct for therapeutic and non-therapeutic research involving humans as test subjects. The WMA made use of the Nuremberg Code to draft this document, and the vital points in this document were: 1. Written consent. Any subject enrolling in a clinical trial or medical research has to give a written consent declaring that they are voluntarily participating in the research and are not being forced or threatened to do so. Second, legal guardians. People who are mentally incapacitated or someone like a child who could benefit from the research, but they are not in a position to know about it. Someone, a legal guardian, has to give permission for that. Third, the research document or protocol should be reviewed by an ethical committee who would then approve or disapprove the study. If you go to the website of this organization, the WMA, you will find a list of the General Assembly meetings whereby amendments or vital things were discussed relating to the Declaration of Helsinki. Before proceeding with a few more incidences and laws in the pharmaceutical industry, let me show you what else the World Medical Association was involved in. It was the Declaration of Geneva. It was formalized by this organization in 1948, and it's about their dedication to the humanitarian goals of medicine. It is also where you find the Hippocratic Oath or the Doctor's Oath, an oath whereby doctors swear to adhere to specific ethical standards in their profession. The last document that I wish to discuss that brought further changes to laws, especially in the US, was the Belmont Report from 1979. It is important to the rest of the world because other regions later on adopted similar laws. This document was written by the US National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. The commission came into existence after laws were passed by the Congress, the National Research Act in 1974. The actual title of the document is Ethical Principles and Guidelines for the Protection of Human Subjects of Research. It was published in 1979. The trigger for this document, or the formation of this group, was reports and testimonies relating to the 40-year Tuskegee syphilis study on black males. I will discuss that after this, but that study had started in 1932. It was run by the US Public Health Service. It was ended after an employee of that department came to realize what was happening, thought it was unethical, and fought to have it terminated. And this document was called the Belmont Report because it was drafted at the Belmont Conference Center in Maryland State. The report has three principles. The first one is respect for persons. This here means that after being clearly informed about the purpose of the study, the individual should sign the informed consent form, which is a statement that also shows their voluntary participation in the research. Anything relating to this should be considered confidential and private, and there should be no deception by the researchers involved. Second, beneficence. The researchers can maximize the benefit of the research, but they should ensure that no risk or harm comes to the subject. Third, justice. Fairness should be applied in the research. That also means the selection criteria should reflect this. This document became the foundation for the ethical treatment of test subjects in research in the US. This here doesn't mean that the Declaration of Helsinki doesn't apply to the US. It does. It's just that the US government was incorporating elements of that document into their own laws. As promised, let's now look at the Tuskegee syphilis study. I did mention earlier that it was conducted by the US Public Health Service. It started in 1932, and the subjects for this study were 600 in total, recruited from poor African American communities. They were males, and a total of 399 had syphilis, while the remaining 201 were healthy individuals, which were controls for the study. The subjects were misled about being treated for bad blood. This was a term used to mean various illnesses or conditions, including syphilis, anemia, and fatigue. The subjects were monitored for years, and no medication was given to them, even though penicillin became available worldwide in 1947. It was only later on, in the early 70s, that it was terminated, but this happened after an employee, an epidemiologist by profession, as already stated, did notice what was going on, thought it was unethical, fought to have it terminated, but it was difficult, and in the end, he had to leak it over to the press, which brought the study to a close. So what happened after the termination of the Tuskegee syphilis study? The patients were treated in 1973. Then in 1974, as I did mention earlier, the US Congress passed the National Research Act, which made it possible for the formation of the commission that drafted the Belmont Report to protect test subjects from 1979. Then 2 decades later, President Clinton, on behalf of the US government, apologized to the victims. Then in the 1980s, laws relating to the use of humans as test subjects in research were further amended or new ones were introduced. All this came about as more cases of abuse with people as test subjects came to light. I do have here 2 examples. The first one was about a trial done at the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital in New York. In this study, done in 1963, the doctors involved injected elderly patients who had chronic illnesses with live cancer cells. This study had the aim of understanding organ transplantation. They did not tell the patients that they were using live cancer cells. Their argument was that the body would reject the cells anyway, so why alarm the patients? The second study was at a prison in Philadelphia that was between the mid-1950s and the mid-1970s. In that prison, several studies were done to test chemicals on the skin. The procedure was painful, it took so long, but it didn't matter to the prisoners because they were paid $100. That was quite a lot of money compared to the measly amounts they could have been earning doing chores in the prisons. The relevant government agencies studied all the cases of abuse reported and further amendments were made to existing laws. One of these was in 1980, whereby prisoners were barred from participating in any clinical trials. Also in 1987, another law came into existence. It relates to new unregistered drugs. These were given the green light to be applied in emergency situations like what we are experiencing currently with the deadly COVID-19 illness or other diseases presently without any treatment. The 1980s was also the period when the idea about the international harmonization of clinical trials was conceived. It would take years for this to finally be realized until the 1990s, but it meant that collaboration between the different regulatory authorities and the pharmaceutical industry became possible. Laws and practices were standardized, so it became possible for drug trials in one region of the world to be extended to another. We have seen changes to regulations in the US, especially with regard to use of humans as subjects in research. This has been over the years since the Nuremberg Code was written. It's all important to the pharmaceutical industry because the US has the biggest drug regulation authority in the world and the market there is huge. Now let's look at Europe, especially the EU, which is comprised of 27 nations. Currently, clinical trials in the European Union are governed by the Clinical Trials Directive 2001/20/EC. This document was written by the European Parliament and Council in April 2001. Its original aim was to simplify and harmonize the governance of clinical trials in the EU, but now it has found permanent footing in the region. The latest updates to regulations in the EU relating to clinical trials are as follows. 1. Database known as the EUDRACity. This is now available for all clinical trials taking place in the EU, and a maximum review time is specified for them. 2. Since 2016, there has been one portal for submissions of clinical trials applications on the website of the European Medicines Agency. Third, since 2016, there has also been one portal for decisions relating to the clinical trials. Further, point number 4, a national advisory or ethical body can still review an application before it is submitted to the EMA. This here is the website of the European Commission. You'll find there all the regulations and updates relating to clinical trials. And this particular page is the section for the Clinical Trials Directive. This is the Directive 2001/20/EC, which is for clinical trials. Before rounding off, let's look at the organizations and regulatory authorities or agencies involved in clinical trials. Organizations. 1. International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use. It used to be called the International Conference on Harmonization, or ICH. I'll take a look at what this one does in a bit. 2. Council for International Organization of Medical Sciences. I'll also explain what this one does. 3. Other. This here refers to various national medical organizations or agencies that could be called upon to work on clinical trials. Now let's consider the two organizations with a little bit more detail, starting with the International Conference on Harmonization. I mentioned in a previous slide that the idea for the organization was born in the 1980s. Well, in 1990, this idea came to be realized, and so this research body was formed in Geneva, Switzerland. After some years, in 2015, following some reforms, it changed its name to International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use. It has a guideline known as the ICH GCP guideline, with the aims of protecting the safety, rights, and well-being of human subjects in clinical trials. It also strives to ensure the scientific validity and credibility of the data collected in human clinical trials. This organization coordinates work in the 3 regions, United States, Europe, and Japan, between the drug regulatory authorities and the pharmaceutical industry. The general future aims of this research body are as follows. 1. Economize on the use of humans, animals, and resources. 2. Prevent delays in the global development and availability of medication worldwide. So any company working on clinical trials could make use of this research establishment. We have looked at the organizations involved in clinical trials internationally. Now let's look at the regulatory agencies. Regulatory agencies. Number 1, Federal Drug Administration. This, located in the US, has been in existence since 1906 as an agency of the US Department of Health and Human Services. 2. The European Medicines Agency, established in January 1995, is a centralized marketing authority for the European Union. Third, the Pharmaceuticals and Medical Devices Agency, or PMDA, of Japan. Between 1979 and 2004, it existed as various organizations under the Ministry of Health. It was established in 2004. These 3 agencies are the largest in the world, and usually, after the marketing authorization application has been submitted, the drug's data has been reviewed, and the drug is finally registered, it will be readily available in various other countries. And lastly, there are the national regulatory agencies in the EU, the rest of Asia, Africa, or elsewhere. They too can authorize the marketing of new medication. For example, a company in South Africa could apply for the registration of their drug with their own national regulatory agency. But if they wish to market the drug in the US, in Europe, the EU, or a place like Japan and Asia, they would have to deal with these three major regulatory agencies. An example of another national regulatory agency is the MHRA, or Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, located in the UK. For more information about the FDA, you can check its website online. There you will find anything relating to regulations surrounding medicines, medical devices, as well as food. As of the European Medicines Agency, since its inception, it used to be located in London, but because of Brexit, it moved to the Netherlands in mainland Europe. You can check it out online. That also applies to the Japanese PMDA and the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare. Just Google them. With regards to the African continent, I'm not aware of any single regulatory body, but each individual state should have its own regulatory authority. They are the ones who authorize the marketing of any medicine there, whether produced under license or not. Then there are the state ministries of health, who could also be involved when a company wishes to test a drug in their nation. Other bodies include any medical establishment such as the WMA that we have already looked at. There is the World Health Organization. Then there are the African Centers for Disease Control and the other two organizations we have looked at, the ICH and the CIO-MS. The Africa CDC, or Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, run by the political African Union organization, with the aim of streamlining and building the capacity and capability of the African continent in responding to current or emerging diseases such as the COVID-19 illness. Did respond to the proposal by the French doctors as everyone else, rejecting it. Even so, they are not a drug regulatory authority. Hopefully, such a body would appear in the African scene in the near future. With this, we have come to the conclusion about this disputed topic on vaccination. I'll do this in three parts. Conclusion 1. Is the illegal testing of drugs or vaccinations possible? By that I mean, can any company from Europe or North America just do whatever it likes by going to Africa, bribing officials, and then testing drugs there? First of all, before answering that, let me say this. Bribing and fraud are big crimes that are not tolerated in the pharmaceutical industry. Anyone working in the industry is expected to be trained on what constitutes fraud and bribing. Anyone found involved in these crimes is likely to be fined and imprisoned, as such offenses could sink a company. Its license to operate would be withdrawn. Furthermore, anyone unfamiliar with clinical trials or the testing of drugs should know that the guinea pig stage is already done. The drug is ready for use, and this is like the examination period. So after all the years of investments and hard work, a company shouldn't be doing stupid things like getting involved in fraud, bribing, or the illegal testing on subjects. At this point, they're dealing with a regulatory authority or agency that wishes to see two things: that the drug or vaccine is safe in humans, and that it is effective against its target illness. The data generated would answer these questions. Most often, submissions at this stage are done with multiple regulatory agencies who scrutinize all documents, including signed patient consent forms. As discussed already, these are forms in which the patients have signed that they understood the trial and that they are voluntarily participating in it. So, my answer to the question as to whether or not the illegal testing of drugs is possible, I would say for a genuine company that abides by the rules, it is no, because it's a strictly regulated industry. Conclusion 2. Here I'm comparing drug companies and oil or mining companies. We have seen that drug companies are subject to strict regulations. How about the oil and mining companies? When an oil or mining company extracts the mineral of interest from a rural area, is there a law to follow which asks about their reporting on the impact of the activity on the health, safety, and livelihood of the inhabitants? Or are they asked about the activity and the contamination of water, the soil, and the atmosphere, which in turn would cause deformation in newly born children? From my observation, the answer is no. To see for yourselves, go to African countries like Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea, South Sudan, and Angola. People have or are being displaced, children are being born with birth defects, and all that matters to the governments or the companies involved is the money to be generated. Conclusion 3. There should be a clear distinction between criminals using fake medication to harm and a genuine drug company. In the past, stories might have trickled in the news media about mercenaries elsewhere in Africa, especially Southern Africa, who in the 1980s and 1990s they deceived rural or urban populations with fake vaccines or diseased vials. Their aim was to exterminate those African populations. If those allegations are proven to be true, then those people would be criminals, murderers. And since the perpetrators belong to white supremacist groups, those crimes would be considered racially motivated offenses. Those crimes are heinous, are punishable by law, and should not be attributed to any drug company. A documentary released in 2019 by Danish filmmakers describes confessions by members of such a mercenary organization in South Africa. This documentary is entitled Cold Case Hammarskjöld, Hammarskjöld being the Secretary General of the UN in the early 1960s, who in 1961 perished in a plane crash in present-day Zambia. By then, he was en route to the separatist Katanga region of the Congo on a peace mission. A South African mercenary organization that has existed since colonial times claimed to be behind the downing of the plane. They said it wasn't an accident. Furthermore, there were documents supposedly from these guys that were turned over to the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission some years ago that supported the assassination claims. There were also documents relating to the setup of clinics by philanthropists who were best described as wolves in sheep clothing, since they had fake medication and vaccines in those clinics meant to purge the African population in that country. They said by so doing, they wish to bring back the glory days of apartheid South Africa with a white-dominated government. Sadly, the only thing they seem to have succeeded in was let Africans throughout the continent mistrust any genuine medical product originating from the West as yet another sinister plot against the black race. Armed with the information presented here, act responsibly. Do not spread misinformation about medication or vaccines that otherwise would have saved countless lives, especially in this current COVID-19 climate. The virus is here to stay. Second or third waves could even be deadlier. Scientifically, only a vaccine could prevent illness or eventual death for those with compromised immune systems. As the old saying goes, prevention is better than cure. So let the medical experts with the capability and the appropriate resources do their job. As long as no company in the continent is active here, all are reliant on others from elsewhere in this world. That's all. Thank you.